You're listening to I Have Some Notes, a podcast supported by listeners like you. To contribute, visit patreon.com/I Have Some Notes.
Hey Greg, I have a pitch for a vampire movie.
Great, let's hear it.
Well, it's not for you, it's for Scott. I need you to take it to him.
Why can't you take it to him?
No reason.
Wait, does it suck?
Well, it is a vampire movie.
I mean, is it a bad pitch for a bad movie?
No.
Why are your eyes shifting like that? Is there something wrong with this?
I said no, just take the damned pitch.
So it is damned.
Oh, yeah, it's cursed as hell, but it's your problem now.
Wait. I have some notes. Damn it, you asshole.
Welcome, everyone, to I Have Some Notes, the movie podcast with cuts, keeps, punch-ups, and tweaks on mediocre movies. I'm Liam Creswick.
I'm Scott C. Bourgeois.
I'm Greg Beaver.
And today we are discussing The Last Voyage of the Demeter. Or, as I like to call it, the Nosferatu we have at home. Yeah, Happy New Year, gang.
Happy New Year.
How was your New Year's? I kind of know how Liam's New Year's was. How was yours, Scott?
Overall, pretty good.
Yeah.
Got out a bit. Kids managed to stay up till midnight. We all had a little toast, and then we took them to bed.
Yeah, I was over at Greg and Aaron's. It was a lot of fun. Mark, old school. I Have Some Notes listeners might remember Mark's appearances on the podcast. Mark was there. That was nice to catch up with him and his partner.
Yeah, I was also invited, but we had competing plans, and we had been invited somewhere else first. We were kind of hoping to maybe make a cameo, and then it just didn't quite work out. We'll be at the next one.
Yeah, maybe.
We're talking about Wicked? Because you sound popular.
Well, maybe. I wasn't popular enough to be defying gravity. We'll put it that way.
That's fair. Yeah, we also all got to see each other last week. Excited to report the three of us and friend of the show, Robin, were all able to gather and go see Nosferatu together in a theater, and that was a lot of fun. We don't often get out all together, the three of us. So,
yep, and seeing a good movie at that.
Yeah,
we all quite dug it. Not everybody in our group who saw it was super into it, and I've seen a few negative reviews. But overall, I quite enjoyed it.
Yeah, I think we were in the big comfy leather seats at a Landmark theater, a little closer than I'd normally sit, but I actually feel like in this movie that was helpful. It really helped kind of engross me in it by just being surrounded by its majesty and beauty in every corner of my periphery.
Yeah, Robert Eggers can paint a pretty picture on screen.
Yeah. And he's a master of atmospheric stuff, and yeah, it was nice to see that in a theater instead of at home for once. So yeah.
So yeah, we do recommend that, but of course that's not the vampire movie we're discussing today.
No.
We are talking about 2023's The Last Voyage of the Demeter, directed by Andre Øvredal, who of Troll Hunter fame, written by Bregi F. Schutt. And based on Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Yeah, it's interesting because Nosferatu is itself derivative of Dracula. It was F.W. Murnau wanted to do Dracula, and he was told emphatically no by the Stoker estate. So he filed the serial numbers straight off of it and changed the story a little bit and filmed Nosferatu and got sued. Sued so hard that prints of the movie were supposed to be destroyed. And it is a miracle that the movie survived to the modern day because no copies were supposed to have survived that purge. But one did. And that's the copy that we get to see fully restored in 4K today. it was then remade by Werner Herzog and now obviously by Robert Eggers. And it's interesting because Eggers in particular, now that both Dracula and Nosferatu were in the public domain, really leaned back into the Dracula for it. And you can see a lot of the plot beats still there from Dracula now, much more so even than the Murnau or the Herzog version. So you get to see part of the voyage of the Demeter in Nosferatu, which we just saw on the weekend. And it was interesting to see those kind of juxtaposed, the full-length version of it versus just that little tidbit in the Eggers film. And I was quite amused because they both, in a way, they both kind of go for the same sort of atmosphere. And it's interesting to see it kind of drawn out into a 2-hour runtime. and then the question becomes, does it work being drawn out into a 2-hour runtime? Was there enough story in that voyage to turn it into a full film? And I'm curious what you guys have to say about that.
I would say almost.
I'll definitely say I'm glad you brought up the fact that essentially the events of this movie happen over the course of about 10, 15 minutes in Nosferatu.
Yeah.
I think because I watched this second, I got more out of it because I could have just imagined this as like a side story or an Elseworlds of like this was the one big deleted scene from, or just like, I'm trying to think of other movies where like you see something going on in the background, like, there was that famous Star Wars comic about 2 stormtroopers in the back of all the events of the original series. Kind of had this vibe to it.
Yeah.
So, I definitely, because I got to think about Nosferatu, I got a lot more out of this than I think I would have if I'd watched it first. So, yeah.
And it's worth noting that the logbook of the Demeter is all of maybe 4 pages in the original Dracula novel.
I thought they say it's a whole chapter, but I guess.
Well, it is kind of a chapter, but Dracula is told in an epistolary fashion. And so some of the chapters are quite short. And the Demeter chapter is not terribly long, but it's not the shortest chapter in the book. We'll put it that way.
Yeah.
I kind of liked this movie on paper. I liked the concept. I was kind of excited to see it when I first heard about it. And then it got really, really middling reviews, and that kind of turned me off of watching it until finally we kind of got around to it for the podcast. And I kind of still enjoyed my time with it. Like, I didn't hate it.
Yeah, I didn't hate it. It is very much in our sweet spot. This is the middest movie I have seen in the longest time. Like a real 5.5 out of 10 situation. Like it's, yeah.
Yeah, I think I had mentioned at the end of our last episode that I'm a sucker for these claustrophobic bottle type movies, and a bunch of people having to deal with a monster on a ship a la Alien and all these other things is right up my alley. And I kind of figured that I would probably love it even if it sucked. That didn't necessarily happen. I didn't hate it. And I was entertained watching it. And, if you want to see Voyage of the Demeter, I would say don't let the bad reviews stop you, because you'll have a decent time with it, I think.
For sure.
There's some problems, and it kind of collapses under its own internal logic towards the end. And that's probably the most damning criticism I can give it,
Yeah, it's a real, Amanda said, she's like, I'm never going to think about this movie again. I'm going to forget it immediately. Wasn't bored watching it. We did enjoy it, but it's definitely one of those movies where like what it's about is the plot. And like, yeah, it's not some bigger thing you're going to be chewing on for days after.
Yeah, I feel like they tried to give it a little bit more heft through the main character Clemens, because he's got kind of a philosophy he's chasing. He has a character arc, but I think the movie thinks there's more depth there than there is. The movie thinks it's swimming in the ocean, but it's really just crossing a river, if you catch my meaning.
Yeah. That's fair. Of course, the cast is Corey Hawkins as Clemens. You might remember him from The Black Klansman or Kong Skull Island. Sorry, Corey, you've been on the show twice. It also stars Aisling Franchosi as Anna. She was in Speak No Evil. Liam Cunningham, hey, that's my name, as Captain Elliot. We know him from Game of Thrones. He's the onion guy from Game of Thrones.
The Onion Knight.
And the Three-Body Problem.
Davos Seaworth.
Davos, right. And David Dastmalchian as Wojciech. We know him from Oppenheimer, Suicide Squad, or one of my favorite movies of the year, Last Video Store. So,
also quite liked him in Late Night with the Devil.
What did I say?
Yes.
Oh, I said Last Video Store. I meant Late Night with the Devil. Sorry.
I haven't seen it yet, but I've heard a lot of great things, and it's on my list.
Though do check out Last Video Store. It's an Edmonton original sci-fi or horror film, but I meant Late Night with the Devil. Yeah, let's go to the trailer and the plot summary.
The Demeter, on charter from Romania to London. Shipping private crates. Contents unknown. Out at sea with no land in sight.
This here is Clemens. He's a doctor.
You dress like a learned man.
University of Cambridge. I know my way around the boat.
Our charter has agreed to pay a bonus for timely arrival in London.
Something ripped apart the animals.
All the livestock.
This looks like a bite.
Search the ship. Everywhere. Evil is on board. Powerful evil.
The Demeter is bound for London, taking on cargo in Bulgaria. The cargo? Several mysterious crates filled with dirt. And a Dracula. The Dracula, in fact. The Romanian locals refuse to load the crates, instead insisting on paying the Demeter's crew to load it themselves. In hindsight, this really should have tipped the crew off more than it does. As one might imagine, once the ship hits open waters, it's open season for the Dracula. First, it feasts on the dog. Then the livestock, then the racist member of the crew. Eventually it works its way down to the cute little kid. Not cool, Dracula. In the end, the remainder of the crew decide to sink the boat so this monster is not permitted to feast on the whole of London. It was a good plan until they discover the Dracula can fly, but at that point they're pot committed and attempt to burn the damned boat anyhow. Unsurprisingly, the undead flying man-bat survives and London is not saved at this time. Unless, sequel? No. Surely there won't be.
Yeah, the ending
Stranger things have happened.
Where Clemens takes over the captain's log job of like narration every couple scenes, and he's talking like he's going to be the next Van Helsing seemed maybe unnecessary. Like we could find out that he lived, sure. But I didn't need him setting up a sequel.
Well, especially because, I mean, we know the sequel. We've seen Dracula and he's not in it.
And also we've seen the sequel. I've seen the last act of Nosferatu and it doesn't go well for anyone.
Does not go well for anyone. No. There's a lot here to like. I quite like the cast. I think that, the characters are all interesting and, for the most part, have at least a little bit to do. Even the most generic crewmen are like stand out a little bit and have a little bit to do over the course of the movie. I quite like Clemens as a character. I thought he was very good. I like the interplay between the crew. I like how things evolve with them as the situation gets more and more dire. I thought David Dastmalchian in particular was really, really good, actually, as the first mate. I liked the setting. I thought that the set looked really good on the boat. Even if the boat maybe was bigger than it probably should have been. I get that you want to have a little bit more of a visually interesting setting for them to be in. I don't mind that they played with the story of Dracula. I've matured in my tastes as a person who takes in media, that I accept that an adaptation is going to be different. It's going to change things, especially from the book to the screen. And I kind of was going into it expecting that, and I didn't hate some of the changes. So yeah, there's a lot to work with here. in my opinion, on the good side. We'll get into what I didn't like later on.
No,
I hear what
wanna
you guys
follow
like
up
first.
On what you said about Clemens, I was thrilled when I realized he was our point of view character, because he's just like, you just want to root for him. Like, there's not a lot of horror movie protagonists, and this is technically a horror movie. It's not particularly scary, but
it's a gothic horror movie. It's more atmospheric. Yeah,
follows the beats of a horror movie, of Alien or Evil Dead or The Thing type, like claustrophobic, we're stuck with this thing situation. But he was just I'm like, this guy's, like you said, he's got a philosophy. He's the right amount of like skeptical and ambitious. He's got a code. All the other guys did have enough. I felt like it was enough. Oftentimes when we do these kind of movies where it's just sort of like we get a bunch of characters briefly painted long enough for us to care a little bit about them before they get fed to the monster or whatever. And often when we do these, we all complain that they're not fleshed out enough. We didn't spend enough time getting to know the characters. Who are they? Why do they care? I feel like we got enough with all the crew.
Yeah.
And they all stood out in a very distinct way, from each other. Even the just kind of generic hands that were all Russian or Romanian.
Yeah, I think part of the reason that worked too is because Dracula's first victims aren't the crew members. Yeah. So the people who are trapped on the boat get a little bit of time to realize there's something wrong, they're in danger, and like have that emotional shift so that we get to see their characters kind of change and evolve a little bit before the first one gets picked off. And that's a deft little bit of screenwriting there, because it lets you sit with the characters a little longer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And even before that, you get the nice dinner scene where you get to learn who the characters are, and through their interactions with Clemens, you get to understand a little bit of what their perspective is. Yep. Enough to know whether you like them, whether you hate them, who you can trust, who you can't trust, and all that little good stuff that helps. Helps you get emotionally invested when the shit does hit the fan.
Yeah.
This isn't a criticism, but all of the tropes are there with these guys. There's the guy who's just in it for the money, can't wait to get paid and get done. There's the very pessimistic guy who's always looking off wistfully, being like, bad times, man. It's not gonna be good. It's gonna be bad. You got the religious guy who like cites some kind of higher spirituality. You got the adorable kid. You got the wild card in the young woman that shows up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like the captain. The captain's on his, like, he's 2 weeks from retirement.
And his first mate has everything to lose. Like, he's the one guy who's gonna, like, when the shit hits the fan, may or may not be the one to be like, no, my selfish needs, yank. Like,
yeah. And I like also that the first stowaway they discover is not, in fact, the vampire. Is a nice little twist, because it's another little harbinger of the danger to come. And I mean, historically speaking, and I'm not saying this is correct, the idea of a woman on the ship would be seen as bad luck, and so it adds to that. It compounds to the feeling of doom over the crew.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it creates a lot more conflict between Clemens and the rest of the crew. And
it adds a female character, which is nice. And she's quite capable. And I liked Anna because nothing about her seemed unrealistic or hackneyed. She's a woman who understands the nature of the danger right away once she's capable of communicating it. She's capable enough because she's like a Romanian peasant. So of course she knows how to use a gun. Like, that just makes perfect sense. She has a desire to try to live, so she's motivated to help the crew even when they're resistant to her help. Like, it worked. She was the right character to drop into that situation to mix things up, but not cause more chaos, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you were so positive about her, because Aaron felt almost the exact opposite.
Really?
Her note was to eliminate the character entirely because she felt like Anna only really supplied some exposition and did not do enough outside of that. And she felt that it would have actually been creepier and more haunting if the crew didn't experience that exposition.
Yeah.
I mean, they could have. There's a moment in the movie. I think it's Clemens goes down into the cargo hold and like reads some sort of manifest of some sort.
Mm-hmm.
They're kind of like doing a little bit of like research on these crates that they've taken on, and I kind of agree with Aaron in the sense that like if you're going to add a little bit of exposition about like what this could possibly be, you could probably sprinkle it in there in that scene where the breadcrumbs of where these crates came from kind of suggest this sort of foreboding thing.
Well, plus there's one of the crew members is already a superstitious Romanian, so there's no reason
he
couldn't. Once they start to glean that it might be a vampire, he could be the one to be like, oh shit, it's a vampire. Let me backtrack and just say, not to undermine what Aaron was saying, that if you wanted to drop a female character into the mix, Anna was a good way to do it.
Yes. But I'm really thinking about what she does in terms of the plot, and I don't think it's anything other than get halfway to passing the Bechdel test. Like she all of the things she offers could be retrieved other ways, which that alone isn't a reason to cut the character, because then someone's got to, like, whether you do it in some this kind of exposition or she says it 6 and 1 half dozen the other. My problem why I think maybe you cut her is because her relationship to Dracula doesn't totally make sense by the end, because she's like there to be fed on, but she doesn't turn into a vampire. And that has something, I think, to do with the blood transfusions, but it's not totally clear. Yeah. And also she's got all these bite marks all over her, but she doesn't burst into flames. And also wouldn't the doctor have seen the bite marks?
Yeah, she does in the end. As she points out, like all the transfusions and his ministrations to keep her healthy just were staving off the inevitable. Yeah. On points that I don't like people turning into vampires. I thought that was kind of dumb that suddenly we had a ship full of vampires. We didn't need zombies. Okay. We didn't need zombies.
Okay. I disagree only because based on our text chat before this, I think I know what one of your fixes was. So I'm not going to we're going to tiptoe into fixes. Classic. We're 20 minutes in. We got to say the phrase tiptoe into fixes. Scott, you had said something about how we see a lot of Dracula. Mm-hmm. Maybe we should see less of him. Shark from Jaws.
Yes. Which was something else I was going to get to in a moment. But
I agree. And you know what you do instead of showing him? You show people turning into vampires, and then it's less like Alien and it's more like Evil Dead. Because the scene where the guy's tied to the post and he's starts kind of babbling nonsense before he bursts into fire, I'm like, that is, I'll swallow your soul, ha 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 ha. It's that vibe. And so I think if you don't want to have a million scenes of this Gollum-ass looking Dracula running around the ship, you spend time with the effect he's having on the crew, and you pull more from Evil Dead than from Aliens or things where people are dead and you never see the monster.
Yeah, I do think that would have been fun, because part of the problem I have with the first 2/3 of the movie is that it does feel a bit repetitive in that, during the day they're trying to figure out what's going on. At night, go back up top, Dracula attacks. And then that happens another time and then another time. So I was getting the first 2/3 are pretty good, but that was my only real niggle with it, is that it just was a bit too repetitive.
I think that you can break up that monotony a little bit by having the crew in a weird reverse sort of way create more obstacles for Dracula, even though we're on their side and not on Dracula's side, just to see how could Dracula possibly overcome this precaution they've taken. And sure enough, someone else gets taken.
That's a great idea.
And I think that actually would have been an interesting way to break that up. So it's not always samey. Like, well, we'll barricade ourselves in the room and then someone still ends up dead. How? But I back to Liam's original point, I do think we see too much Dracula too early. Like 10 minutes in and we're already seeing Dracula. Number 2, we see Dracula, which I think is bad. Number 3, Dracula looks like ass. Like he's very obviously CGI. It's not good CGI. And he doesn't look scary. He just looks kind of dumb.
He looks like Golem.
He looks like Gollum. He looks like Gollum and Man-Bat had a baby.
Yeah.
And it's not great. It's not a great look. I would have preferred, especially if you wanted to go with a more monstrous Orlok-looking Dracula, save that till the third act. Make it a big shocking reveal when we finally see Dracula. And it's like, oh, he doesn't even look like Bela Lugosi. He looks like a weird scabby skeleton man. Okay. Make it a shocking surprise. Don't tip your hand so early, movie.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was also not a fan of what Dracula looked like. And I entirely agree with Scott that the reveal of Dracula was too early and too often and cut some of the fun and maybe some of the tension out of it.
Yeah.
I mean, you could kind of take it on faith that it's going to be Dracula just by the name of the movie alone. So I don't know that it's necessary to really show him that early or have a whole lot of exposition about who Dracula is and all this kind of stuff. Like, I think it works better because like you just play off the fact that everyone knows the basics of the myth and then you go on from there.
And that creates dramatic irony too.
Yeah.
Delightful dramatic irony because we, the audience, know more than the characters going into it. We know that those boxes have a Dracula inside and that those people are in serious danger right from hop. And as they're trying to piece it together, we're shouting at the screen, it's Dracula. There's a Dracula. Why don't you know there's a Dracula?
Overall, think you're both right. I'm just going to be a bit of a contrarian for, radio reasons.
No, absolutely.
Because we all know it's Dracula going in, it's very, like, saving him maybe is diminishing returns. Maybe because we all know you get to have more fun with it. And I'm not going to say like, oh, we need to see more of him. But the thing you said earlier, how does he navigate this situation that he's in where he doesn't necessarily have the upper hand like he does in a castle? And so we see just as much Dracula as we do, but he's just doing more interesting things.
Yeah, that could work
and, like,
too.
Using his, like, at one point he's got powers of mimicry that doesn't really come back up. The wings don't come in until 2/3 of the way through. So I think, like, we can see Dracula early, but just have surprises come from the way he is interacting with this crew in this ship.
Yeah, and that's another one of my criticisms with Dracula, actually. Dracula is a mastermind. Like, in the book, he's scheming to move to England to, like, as a power play. He wants some political power. He's not just out for blood. And he's, generally speaking, in the novel, not out for romance either. That's an invention of later media. But in this movie, he seems more like an animal. Like, he seems mostly just driven by hunger and a desire to kill. And I guess maybe he's a hungry vampire who's, like, been at sea for weeks and is running on instinct. But it's more interesting to me if they mistake him as a beast at first. Like, it's clearly some kind of monster.
Character even says that.
Yeah, like it's a beast, it's a monster, and then slowly get to realize, oh no, this thing's really smart. It's too smart. Like,
and powerful, like magic powers.
And
like
powerful, yes. And
I love the fog at the end when the
yes.
Gets covered in sick vape clouds of Dracula magic.
Yeah. and then, like, yeah, maybe we've accidentally hit upon the fix right off the top here. But having the crew present obstacles to Dracula and then being almost terrified seeing Dracula overcome those obstacles with ease time and again, and them not be able to track down where he is in between and, like, put a stop to him, that could create some tension and some interesting differences from night to night as he feasts on the crew, right?
Yeah, it's not a big ship, and it's their ship, and there's more of them than there are of him. It's not like one random asshole has walked up a mountain into an isolated castle. He's on their turf, and it would have been fun to see Dracula on the back foot for the whole movie.
But still coming out on top.
Yeah.
Like he's not in his home turf. He's absolutely outnumbered, and he's still winning. And that in itself creates horror. Like,
because the Dracula we see, you don't really imagine him scheming a trip to London.
No.
He's flying around screaming and ripping people in half like a pterodactyl.
It seems more like he accidentally got put in a crate and thrown on board.
Yeah. Great. Well, I think we're off to the races. Let's literally put a nail in this coffin and fix the Last Voyage of the Demeter on the other side of this break.
I'd like to get more reading done, and joining a book club seems like a good idea, but I don't know.
Why not?
Reading a whole book in a month, that's pretty daunting.
What if it was just a chapter, say a week?
That doesn't sound too bad. Still, getting together with a bunch of people, that's a whole evening.
Well, what if it was only half an hour, whenever you wanted to?
That would be great.
The Read Along, a mini book club for your ears.
Join my wife, Anita,
and my husband, Scott,
as we take you on a journey through a good book,
one chapter at a time. Available right now on your podcatcher of choice.
Welcome back to I Have Some Notes. We're talking about The Last Voyage of the Demeter, based on that one chapter from Dracula where they take him across the ocean in a box and the ship doesn't make it. You might also have seen it in the film Nosferatu. All of this to say, my big fix, and it's sort of germane to what we were discussing before the break, where Greg was talking about like, they go above deck for the night and get a Dracula attack, and then they go back down and everyone freaks out. Back and forth. Multiple nights go by where both that we see like night to morning, many times. And because it's a log, it's implied that there are even days between those nights to mornings.
Yeah, we're just seeing the highlights.
That took me way out of it. Like that is, in my opinion, the biggest problem with this. It strains the credulity of their concern when they're doing all the horror movie classic things of like underestimating them, making some bad calls, doing things that work against their best interest, doubting that there's a problem, right? Like, oh, no, it's fine. Carry on. Oh, no, it was some other hand wavy solution. Yeah, that's what it is. All of it would work better. The entire plot beat of this movie, every plot beat of this movie, if it took place over no more than 3 nights. And maybe that's not accurate to the book, but I think they should be pretty damn close to London when shit starts to go down. Because stretching it out over weeks, it's like you guys just saw a guy burn to death because the sun touched him, and there's curses written all over these boxes, and you guys are still going to carry on business as usual for 3 or 4 days?
Yeah, I actually don't disagree with you, and I'm a big fan of the novel, but again, I'm okay with an adaptation. And what works in the logbook in the novel, this mystery unfolding over several weeks, when you're trying to make it a more fast-paced movie, and you're trying to keep the audience invested and the action moving, I agree with you. Truncating it works, especially because there was a point where like the livestock all gets slaughtered and they're worried about making it to London early, but it's like you could still stop at port for a night and take on some new livestock. Like, like there's no reason you couldn't stop. That was an actual thought I had. So making it so that it's like they're just maybe even just a week out of London when Dracula finally wakes up from his torpor and starts preying on the crew. And that might even explain more why his first attacks are really vicious and animalistic, because he's been slumbering without drinking blood for 3 weeks. Mm-hmm. Dude needs a pick-me-up. So I firmly agree with you on that. I think that's a great fix.
Alien more or less takes place in one night. Evil Dead famously one night. The Thing over a day or two. It really was insane to me that they were like, yeah, don't worry about the fact that all of our livestock died of rabies that also somehow opened a cage. Like, they say that, and that's a great line. They're like, oh, it was rabies. And someone's like, the cages were open. Rabies didn't open the cages.
Yeah.
That's great. That's great horror movie dialogue. But then they sit with that idea for a week.
Yeah. And don't do anything with it. Yeah.
So you take every plot beat of this and you shove it into 3 nights. So night 1 is the livestock and the dog. Night 2 is a couple randos and the kid. And then night 3, all hell breaks loose and they try to get to shore. And it also breaks it up into 3 acts. You get 3 nights of chaos and 2 days to figure out what's going on and or make choices that are ultimately not in your best interest.
I'm going to slightly disagree with you, but only slightly. I think you can pack some of the rest of the voyage into the movie is as act 1, our opportunity to get to know the characters over the slow, like, couple weeks that it takes to get to the point where Dracula wakes up. And then that's like act 2 and 3. And that's just over the course of a few days. Because that way we can still start in Varney and like have Clemens get on board the ship and bring on the new crew, get the boxes on board and have that wonderful foreshadowing. And then we kind of cruise through act 1. Everything seems to be smooth sailing. And then boom, act 2, we're just like days out of London and something's happening. Something terrible is starting to happen.
Yeah, I think you are right. And or just make it shorter. This didn't need to be 2 hours. If you just like made it a tight 90-minute action movie where like, you know,
the only reason why I like mine better is because it gives us a little bit more time with the characters. If we start right at the beginning of the action, then we're going to lose some of the crewmates.
Not right at the beginning, more or less where it is. I guess I'm just saying when we've had movies like this in the past, even as recent as like Alien, whatever Alien we watched, we often are like, oh, either we don't get enough time with the crew and we want more from them, or we're like way too much time with the crew. we like, it's always one or the other with us. And I feel like this movie actually, it was just the right amount of time with all of them.
I kind of agree.
That's what I'm saying. Like we don't need more of it, which is what you're suggesting. I don't think we need less of it. I think we just need the movie to be 20 minutes short.
I think the action beat of the first act can be the discovery of the stowaway, and then you have that's the initial foreboding of something that's going to happen.
In fact, actually, sorry, go ahead. Sorry, Greg.
No, I was finished.
Again, what I started this by saying, doesn't matter the length, doesn't matter the time. The script doesn't need to change. Just whether or not time has passed is what I'm suggesting you change. So the things that happen in the first act over 2 or 3 nights, have them all happen in 1. Same amount of screen time, just have them happen in 1 evening. So it's a little more sweaty and chaotic and exhausting instead of stretching it out over a couple days.
Yeah.
So movie runtime don't change it, but how often the sun rises and sets. Lower that number.
For sure. I'm just saying that we can still have it start in Varney and then have a little bit of the initial part of the voyage and then just cut to 3 weeks later.
Yeah. Yep. Precisely.
Yeah.
So that end, I wish there was a map of their voyage. Those are my 2 notes.
You want a little Indiana Jones map?
I just wanted to because I had to go Google it after to like, oh, that would have been the route they took. Like,
yeah,
they show you a map, but they don't show you where they are on the goddamn map.
I kind of agree with you.
I picked up the route from when they said that Greece was to starboard, and then I just kind of like visually was like, okay, so that layer,
I can't visualize a map of Europe like that.
That actually brings up an interesting point that I just thought of. Clemens's astronomy skill is established right off the bat, and it's brought up again at least once by the first mate as almost a pejorative because he's a learned man, but it's an informed skill that he never uses. And it's interesting you bring up the map and the voyage now, because maybe that's something that could have come back up in act 2 or 3. Like maybe during the chaos, they do lose the charts and they need to figure out where they are, and he can use that skill again, right?
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. It never comes back up.
His skill as a surgeon at least comes up several times.
I think that's probably a good place for me to jump in, because I more or less think that what's good or bad about this movie kind of hinges on Clemens himself. And there's this kind of play going on with science versus the paranormal, or science versus the spiritual. And I feel like that, to me, is where the movie doesn't necessarily work. For one thing, I'm not sure that I necessarily love that, like, this man of science has to learn to accept that he's wrong and conspiracies about monsters are actually true and stuff like that. That's just personal for me. It doesn't, but I think one of the things that I feel doesn't work for me about Clemens is his backstory, which is kind of just boilerplate. I'm a black man living in a time when things were not great for black people, which is a totally valid perspective, obviously, to have. But I feel like because they don't delve any deeper into his backstory, that they kind of do the character a disservice. Because it almost just feels like, oh, well, you're black and people are mean to you, and that's that. If it was more personal, and his backstory had more to do with how do I want to put it, a conflict of faith, or whatever, the UK was a pretty religious place, and maybe not only was his effort to be educated as a doctor a struggle because of the color of his skin, but if it was also a struggle because he had these very strong opinions about science that were at odds with even his professors at his university. Something like that, to sort of really dig into the meat of the conflict within him over the spiritual versus the science, so that his character is quite a bit more fleshed out. And I also don't feel like we get much of a resolution for that particular theme. There's no sort of like moment to me where I'm like, aha, this is spiritual, or aha, this is science. They kind of just play both sides of it. And I actually think that it could be better married into the whole plot itself. If we do what we talked about in the first half, which is to have Dracula show up a lot less, then that gives you way more time for the audience to buy into Clemens' scientific perspective on what's happening on the ship. You get to build that up, and then then it's when you get to the point where there is a man bursting into flames tied to the mast. That could, be a moment that really just rocks that character to his core. Everything that he knew is suddenly shattered, and he has no explanation for what's going on. And he's left to try and somehow pick up the pieces and move forward with the conflict.
And you know what that could be because he never really has like that low moment. Like the crew has that low moment in the hero's journey, but he never really does. If he has that confidence in nature and science shattered, where he's like, well, we're like, the captain's talking about like, well, we're doomed. That could be him. He could be completely despondent. And it's the woman, Anna, who is like, you keep talking about nature, but like, this is just a force of nature that you don't understand. And hey, isn't your whole thing, I want to understand this world? Dude, you just got to understand this thing like the force of nature that it is.
Yeah.
And that could even loosely tie the thing. He was talking about progress, briefly there's a mention of progress, steel ships versus wooden ships. So like,
yeah,
I heard a great quote from Neil deGrasse Tyson recently where he's talking about like in the gaps of science get filled by God, where it's like, oh, I don't know what's beyond the other side. Must be God. But everywhere God is places science has yet to go. And so if he has that perspective of like, this isn't supernatural, this is just some other force of nature that I don't understand, let's learn about it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's actually
restores his...
That is actually very, very close to a conversation that Aaron and I had right after the movie, is that essentially, like, the exploration of science is exactly what you say. Like, it's exploring things that we don't understand. And there's always going to be a plane that, like a ceiling for what humans can understand, about the world in which we exist. And it's conceivable that, maybe a Dracula lives in a section of science that just like is beyond our particular understanding, I really feel like that would be a really interesting, theme to tackle, and maybe not something that I had necessarily seen in a movie before recently.
I like the idea then that Clemens is actually the one who's really pushing for this is some kind of disease. Mm-hmm. Like something clearly infected the animals and they went crazy, and now it's affecting the crew. If we're going with Liam's idea that we're kind of Salem's lotting it, there's a master vampire on board who's turning people. And they're the initial like threat. It starts with a mystery, and then we've got a couple turned crew members, and then we have Dracula. Like there's that escalating thing. Having him be like the one who's dead focused on, I'm a doctor. There's a rational explanation for this. Clearly there's some kind of some sort of blood disease or something on board. We need to quarantine. These people are sick. These animals are sick. Like that's what's going on until he's faced with that incontrovertible proof. It's a vampire. It's a Dracula. And then he has that low point, and he needs to rethink his entire philosophy. Plus that means that he has to deal with the fact that he was the one leading them down the wrong path. He was so sure that it was, that there was a scientific explanation to this, that he may have doomed the crew. And he has to deal with like that knowledge and that burden, because if he had maybe accepted the Romanian guy's suggestion that it was a vampire early on, they might have been able to deal with the vampire before things got so bad, right?
Mm-hmm.
But he's got the captain's on his side. The first mate's like, well, I don't necessarily think there's a vampire on board. Like, so like he's the one calling the shots because he's the learned man, and he's wrong. He's wrong. And he has to come to grips with the fact that he was wrong.
Yep.
Yeah. And then it's still some sort of scientific method that gets them out of it. Though I guess they don't even get out of it, so it doesn't matter. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, their scientific method is destroy the ship so it can't make it to shore. Yeah.
You know what else I would love to see is Clemens being more on the edge of new medical treatment, so that, everyone's kind of like questioning his methods, so that like he's on the edge of science, and then he has to kind of like go to another edge in order to defeat the Dracula.
Fun fact, transfusions were on the edge of science in this time period. So he kind of already is, but I think
touch on that a little.
But I think that maybe
it doesn't seem as they don't like nobody. I was expecting someone to say when he was doing transfusions to be like, "What the fuck are you doing?" And that's what I was expecting, but no one ever said that.
Yeah. Because in the book Dracula, that's like, this is a new science that Van Helsing is and Seward are invested in, trying to pump blood back into Lucy, who must be a universal acceptor, because like 3 different grown men give her blood and she does not die. Granted, she's turning into a vampire at that time. That might have something to do with it. But either way. So yeah, like I I agree with you. If the crew was a little more resistant to the fact that he's like, what are you doing? You're putting blood into her? Like, what is happening?
Mm-hmm.
Like it would show that he is a little more on kind of the edge, and then it doesn't take as much of a push to get him to, okay, Dracula's are real.
And I was thinking about this throughout. So he's giving blood to, I guess he's not taking blood out of her.
No.
Never mind. At one point I was worried the captain was going to turn because he had like blood transfusioned his son. But then I realized like, you're not putting the poison blood back in you. So that's a dumb, yeah, never mind. Forget I said anything.
Yeah.
I know how transfusions work.
You also have the religious cook who could, claim that blood transfusion is blasphemy or whatever you want to do. if you want to take that angle with it.
Well, especially setting him up more as him and the superstitious Romanian crew member really should have been set up as Clemens' foils on board the ship. Like they should have gotten off on the wrong foot. They should have been really pushing back on his like very scientific approach to things. And I think that could have created a little more conflict as well when things start to get tense. If they had really positioned them against him. And then, of course, ironically, it turns out they were right. Another reason why Clemens has guilt to deal with, because they're probably both dead at that point. Which actually they should be dead at that point, because then he can't turn around and rely on them to give him information that could help him, right?
Yeah.
He has to come up with it himself.
Yeah.
I do like that they had this idea like we can't stop or we lose our bonus was a great motivator for why they have to plug through.
At least
that just when you're talking about friction with other crew members, I was like, oh yeah, that was a point of contention. It was like, you can't stop.
Well, and even if we changed it to your version, they can be ahead of time. They can they're on track to get their bonus days away from London, and then things start to go bad. And then you can still have that tension at first, but there's less time for them to second guess the decision to plow through. So that it's
less
too
time
late.
To second guess decisions was in for everything. In my fix.
Because they have too much time to second guess it in this version. Like even again, stopping to pick up new livestock, they would have had time to do that. But in your version, they don't. It's days of chaos. They don't have time to change course or anything at that point.
Yeah.
Especially with the storm driving them forward to London, because Dracula magic. He doesn't need the crew anymore. He's awake, and that ship's getting to shore no matter what.
Yeah. As fun as the line about how, he's rationing us was kind of like a fun reveal. I'm like, he doesn't need to, Any other fixes?
Oh,
I don't know. I think we punched this up.
Yeah, I think there was lots of, it was pretty thorough in all the different ideas that we were firing out there. So, yeah.
And I think it speaks to how much of this should work on paper. Like, it really is just aliens with a different ship and a different monster.
Kind of.
Like, they really didn't need to bungle it this hard in the third act.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot here that works. It's just, it didn't quite make it to the finish line.
You all had some thoughts as well. Thank you to folks who commented on this film when we solicit those on social media. Also, come on over to the Discord. You can find a link to the Discord on ihavesomenotes.com. Anywhere we're on social media. That's where we're chatting about movies and trailers and stuff, and where we source a lot of great comments like this one from Robin, who we saw Nosferatu with.
Yay.
Last Voyage is a baffling movie. Extremely well shot, beautiful looking, great performances, but completely missed the audience. The marketing didn't know how to sell it, especially 3 weeks into Barbenheimer's summer.
Yeah, it's kind of fair.
Yeah.
I did see some trailers and some previews for it. I was kind of excited for it until it started getting the middling reviews, because again, I'm a sucker for a Dracula.
Yeah.
But yeah, it really did get unfortunately drowned out by Oppenheimer and Barbie, which were huge blockbusters.
Yeah.
We also asked for listener comments for your pitch on how to take on Dracula. Dracula the story, not Dracula fight him.
Yeah. Because it was the holidays, we didn't get a lot of feedback, so we put out a couple other questions.
And, we got Nosferatu on the brain. We got a great pitch here from Tack. Scott, you want to read it in your fantastic trailer summary voice?
Sure. So Tack says he's waiting for a pickup at a very busy store on New Year's Eve when he came up with this pitch, and adds, "Let's do this. All right, Tack, let's do this." A wild manhunt commences when a large bounty is taken out on a mysterious man who turns out to be a vampire. Assassins and mercenaries of various creeds, gimmicks, and talents attempt to apprehend or kill him for the reward. Almost none of them were unaware that vampires exist, much less which rules apply, but they are all too cocky and desperate to give up. The vampire is largely uncharacterized and ambiguous, leaving his pursuers to read him in wildly different and contradictory ways. Basically, it's a comedy action farce mixing a mad world and smoking aces. Eventually, Tack says the less immoral, good protagonists capture the vampire and then attempt to deliver him while fending off all the others. It ends with the least dislikable character setting the vampire loose on the most dislikable characters. The vampire lets the final survivor live for reasons we can speculate over. He might have just been full at that point. This is Tack's backup submission if he couldn't watch the movie in time. The implication is he only managed to watch half of it and had no notes, but did say that he was enjoying the film. And indeed, if he's only watched the first half, that's the most
that
enjoyable
sounds about
part.
right.
I didn't have a lot of notes in the first half either.
Yeah.
I even said to Amanda, I'm like, they're really doing a great job setting this up. Like, you get the table scene where you hear everyone's deal. The kid gives Clemens a tour of the ship, so you even get a layout of the ship, but it doesn't feel ham-fisted. It just seems like a little kid who's excited to show things off to his new friend.
Yep.
Actually, to quickly circle back, all the way back to our fixes, if you really did want to pluck Anna out, Clemens's relationship with Toby is really good off the top. Like, they click, they have really good chemistry together, and Toby could have filled in a lot of the stuff that Anna was there with. Giving him a person to like look after if Toby ends up being like maybe one of the early victims, and he needs someone to like try to heal, someone to be protective of. The kid was already there, and they had a really good like feel right off the top. So something to have considered maybe.
Yeah, I was surprised the kid and the dog die early.
Yeah.
That's not usually how it goes.
And
the kid and the dog go first.
Yeah. I feel like in a different time and place, this movie could have done fairly well. A lot of the magic of cinema comes in timing, and sometimes you just don't hit it. Like we were just talking about Barbenheimer, like that's one of those moments where just like the lightning just strikes. But also, if you're into, bottle movies with boats and monsters, I highly recommend an Irish movie called Sea Fever. It was made in 2019. Very good, very fun, sort of in this line, except a lot more science-based. So yeah, if that's your jam, go check that out.
And if you're looking for arguably a better Dracula movie, I think we all liked Nosferatu. But I guess that's where we'll end it for today. So thanks for tuning in and joining us at the beginning of a new year, which will hopefully be full of good movies, ? You can tell us what you're watching. Yeah, well, yeah, fair. You can tell us what you've been watching anytime by hitting us up on the various socials. You can find us on Facebook, facebook.com/I have some notes. We're on Blue Sky at I have some notes. You can search for us there. You can also hit up our Discord server. That's where things are really popping off. We're always having great conversations with all of you. So please feel free to join in. While you're doing that, you can also give us a little rating and review on your podcatcher of choice, because that helps us out.
We are also on Patreon. If you want to head over to patreon.com/I have some notes, there's some cool bonus content, our recommendation show. We got my report from the Edmonton International Film Festival, which I'm very grateful for, because those are now movies I don't have to talk about when we talk about our best of the year, because I already talked about them there. Makes room for other stuff. And honestly, we just appreciate the financial support. So thank you to everyone who's already a patron. And if you aren't, I encourage you to go check it out. There's stuff there worth the subscription.
Yeah, and as Liam hinted, in 2 weeks, we'll be doing our customary wrap up the year that was. So we'll be talking about our favorite movies of 2024, so you can tune in then and get a bunch of recommendations. Maybe we saw some things that you missed, and you get some good recommendations. So check that out.
Until then, I'm Liam Creswick.
I'm Scott C. Bourgeois.
I'm Greg Beaver. Keep watching the skies.